Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. Naresh Vissa here, coming to you from Tampa, as always, with Adam.
Howdy, howdy, everybody.
And with us is another all-star guest. He is known as Mr. Dad. That's actually how you might have heard of him. Mr. Dad, Armin Brott. He's a former Marine. Armin Brott has devoted the last 15 years to providing men with tools, support, and knowledge to help them become the fathers they want to be and their families need them to be. He is a New York Times, #1 New York Times, multiple best-selling author of several critically acclaimed books for fathers. He has sold well over 1 million copies.
Not too shabby.
Some of those, not too shabby. I mean, I don't think we've had a guest on the show who has sold as many books as Armin has. His most popular books are The Expectant Father, Facts, Tips, and Advice for Dads to Be. And I actually referenced this book while my wife was pregnant last year. And also the book, The New Father, A Dad's Guide to the First Year. I have not checked this book out, but I am in the first year. So I'll have to check that out. He has written on fatherhood for hundreds of newspapers and magazines and is a frequent guest on television programs such as Today's Show. He also has a nationally syndicated newspaper column called Ask Mr. Dad, and he has his own radio show and podcast called Positive Parenting. On the last episode, we talked about being a stay-at-home father and how to succeed during these turbulent lockdown times due to the virus and really post-virus. So we thought we'd bring Mr. Armin Brott on the show just so he can share some tips on how to move forward, how men can lead their families during times like this, how they can lead while working from home and still be good fathers. So Armin Brott, thanks for joining us on the Work From Home Show. It's really, truly an honor.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So how many kids do you have?
3.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 of them are really old, and the other one is a high school junior.
When you say really old, how old is really old?
Out of the house. Well, that's all you need to know.
One of them just turned 30.
Okay.
Which I consider to be, that's like older than I am, so I don't know how the math works out there exactly, but somehow they catch up with us. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, tell us, Armin, how can parents keep their sanity being cooped up for months now because of this virus?
Well, I think one of the most important things, and this is especially a dad thing, is we need to understand that you do not have to entertain your children every minute of the day. You don't have to be there physically with them every minute of the day. We need to be keeping an eye on them to make sure that they aren't doing some dangerous, horrible thing. But they need downtime, and we need downtime. And the downtime is an absolute mental health necessity for everybody, that they need to learn how to entertain themselves, they need to learn how to take care of themselves, and we need to be able to get away from everybody. And I think too many of us feel that we need to be doing something with them all the time. And it puts a lot of pressure on us, and it drives the kids crazy.
Yeah, I blame social media for a lot of that, I'll say, because everybody is now comparing each other. But yeah, I think it's really important for parents to know that it's okay for your kid to be bored. That's something you're going to have to deal with all throughout life. So it's okay for your child to feel like they're bored.
I just started thinking about this the other day that kids are always saying, "Oh, I'm bored. And I can just imagine 20 years from now, some of these kids who are going to have kids of their own, and their kids are going to be saying, I'm bored. And they're going to say, you know what? You don't know anything about boredom. Back in 2020, the COVID thing, man, that was boredom. Let me tell you, you don't know nothing about boredom.
It's amazing how the cycles happen all throughout history.
Yeah.
Well, you do bring up a good point on boredom, because I actually think boredom can cause a lot of problems, not between children and their parents, but between husband and wife. Like, you'll be surprised. You probably know this, Armin. I mean, you're the best-selling author on parenting and relationships, but I mean, I have friends who have either come close to divorce or gotten divorced because their spouse either got bored of them or they were just bored with their life in general in the house and took out kind of the frustration that comes with boredom on their spouses, really on their husbands.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and it brings up a very important issue I think about relationships in general and about friendships in particular. I remember having conversations with my oldest daughter when she was a teenager. She's the kind of kid who has one or two close friends, as opposed to my middle daughter, who has 100 close friends. And so when my oldest daughter would lose a friend, or they'd go in and out of cycles, she would be very shaken up by the whole thing. And we would have these conversations and be talking to her about, not everybody is going to be your best friend for everything. You're going to have certain people who are going to be really good friends for talking to about certain things. You're going to have people who are really good friends for just going to hang out and play pinball or play video games or something. And you're going to have certain friends who are going to be great for just watching movies together. I think that husbands and wives, or people who are in relationships, whether they're same sex or not, are finding out the same thing, is that we have a tendency to think of our spouse or our significant other as somebody that we want to spend every single minute with. And what we're being reminded of in these times is that we have friends, and we have friends, and some friends are great for going out and having a beer with, and some friends are great for going to watch movies with, but we don't have those friends now, at least in the same way, and so we're stuck with our significant other. And I think it really emphasized, you just mentioned a few seconds ago about social media, and we need to be taking advantage of Zoom and Skype. Of course, some of us can't get Skype to work, but Zoom and all sorts of technological things to maintain those friendships that are outside of the significant romantic relationship, because we need those things, because our spouse or significant other just simply cannot satisfy all of our needs. No matter how in love we are, there's going to be certain things that just, you want to talk to somebody else about. And that's especially true for men, is that, well, it's true for men or for women, depending on how you want to look at it. You look at studies on this, and most of the time, a woman will say her best friend is another woman. Most of the time, a man will say his best friend is his wife. And that's a very different, very significant difference. That a woman has got friends outside the relationship, and a guy doesn't. And so that's why you mentioned that women are getting bored with their husbands, and this is exactly the problem.
So you talked about letting the kids kind of entertain themselves. How have you noticed, obviously you started writing, I'm assuming you wrote the Expectant Father and the Guide to the First Year, towards the beginning of your kid's life. How has the entertainment of your kids changed over time as they went from, newborn, where you really do have to be there, most minutes of the day, to 15 to 30, where your presence, if you were there every minute of the day, would not be appreciated by your child?
Well, it's a very important change in the relationship. And as your kids get older, you discover this, and especially as a dad, that you are less needed. Your kids, your teenagers don't need you to be around all the time, as opposed to your 4-year-old or 5-year-old. And that's when you start getting all sorts of, you're the best daddy in the world kinds of cards, and the macaroni art that comes home from preschool, that you really are the center of the child's universe. And then after a while, that changes. And as a dad, as parents in general, but it's harder for dads to do this, we have to transition from dad who knows everything, who's the source of all knowledge, to dad who really should only offer his opinion when it's asked for, and dad the coach, as opposed to, again, dad the director of everything. And those are subtle changes, and they're hard. They're hard for us, and it also changes in the way that we feel needed in our relationship. Is when we have a little kid around who really needs us for everything, we feel very validated, and we do things for our kids because that's the way men typically express love for another person, is by doing something for them. And we get back this overwhelming love from our kids often. And as that changes and your kids don't need you as much, you really kind of feel I don't know what purpose I have anymore as a father, or whether I have any value as a person, because my kids don't need me. And I can tell you, as somebody who's had young 20s and late 20 kids, I felt very out of touch with them for a number of years. And then it was like the best thing that ever happened is they would call up and say, hey, can you help me with our taxes? And I'd say, well, great, now I know I've got something to do and we can connect again. And it really, a silly thing like the IRS helps build relationships.
Something you can thank the government for.
I know. Who knew?
Yeah, well, we actually, surprisingly, we didn't expect this, but we have a lot of women listen to our show and who are moms. So I'm taking notes. I've got I'm a millennial. I've got a son who's just turned 3 months old. So this is all valuable advice and tips for me. But for the mothers out there, kind of how should they plan accordingly? You said the fathers, once a kid turns around teenage, you can kind of take a step back. The son or the kid, the son or the daughter has their own personality. But how about for moms?
Well, moms really have to deal with the same issues. One of the big differences, though, is that moms tend to have a stronger support social network that they can deal with of other moms or their sisters or their mothers or mothers-in-law or whatever, people that they can connect with and they ask advice of. And guys tend not to do that. We're buying books sometimes, and we're going online and asking questions sometimes, but we tend to do a lot less of that than moms do. So we tend to feel, am I the only one who's ever concerned about this, or you feel completely alone in these issues? So I think moms are very much dealing with the same kinds of issues, and some of it has to do with the gender or the sex of the child and the sex of the parent. Is that as girls hit teenage years, they tend to go through a phase where they hate their mother, and then dad becomes the center of all. That was in some ways my favorite time of my kids' teenage years, is when they would me, because I was the favorite parent when they went through. Hey, I've got 3 daughters. They all have hated their mother at various times. And then I know that people who have sons, it's the exact opposite. The boys go through an I hate my dad phase, and then they love the mother. So there are some things that are different and some things that are very much the same. They just play out a little bit differently.
So as people, especially the men, are home, the kids are not going to school right now. They had their time where school was shut down towards the end of the year, and then obviously the summer's coming along, and then, who knows what's going to happen, as the new school year starts. But whenever you hear about homeschooling, you almost always hear about, the women doing it. How can men get involved in that? And what's their kind of role in your opinion?
Oh, they have a tremendous role. I mean, first of all, dads need to be more involved in every aspect of education. They need to be volunteering in the kids' schools when we have schools again for dads to volunteer in, because kids need to see that men are involved in education and that they support their kids. It's a rare thing, particularly in elementary years, for kids to see a guy during the day, an adult man during the day. Most of the teachers are women, and so they aren't getting that. So that's important. But I think guys have to think about, what are your skills and what can you teach? I mean, somebody like me, if I'm not involved in homeschooling, but I could do a workshop by Zoom for a bunch of kids who are being homeschooled about how to write, what various aspects of writing and research and organization of essays. Kids need to learn these things. So there's that. You could have a class on sports. You've got a guy who might be a chemist or a programmer, because somebody could do a class on pretty much anything to keep kids going. And also, even if you're not doing homeschooling, if your kids are involved in a regular school, it's really important for the dad to show support for the kids by helping them and ensuring them that they've got what they need to do their homework, they've got a quiet place to do it, and keeping them on track and encouraging them to get the work done, because it's really easy to just slough off on a lot of this stuff. But just being there, showing up, asking a lot of questions. Hey, how you doing? What are you learning? Tell me about what's going on. Anything I can help you with, if you happen to know something more than your kids do, that they, of course, would never admit that, but you may still know that. So it's really more about being there and showing support and letting them know that you really do care. Even though you don't have classes, you're not off the hook.
Yeah, it's been really interesting for me personally. I have a 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and twin 5-year-olds, and it's been interesting for me as a stay-at-home dad and also a homeschooling dad, just the the complete lack of, male presence in these environments. And it's been really awkward for me personally. And so I completely agree with the need for the presence in these things, because it's so easy just to say, oh, that's quote unquote women's work, and that's what women do, and men don't do that.
And I think it's something that dads buy into a little bit.
It's an easy get out of jail card.
Yeah, but you realize after a while that it's easy, but it's not very smart.
Right.
And you realize also after a while, it sounds like you've got this down really well, and I think probably most of the people who are listening do, that we know that we have certain skills. I mean, whether it's even if you don't think that you have skills, you could just have an evening or afternoon story reading time where the dad reads a story to a bunch of kids by social media or some sort of video conferencing thing, just to show that you were involved, so they see a man involved in childcare, in interacting in a loving, kind, nurturing sort of way with other kids. And that sends such a tremendously important message, especially to boys, but also to girls, but to boys, to say, look, being a dad is important, and this may be something that you want to aspire to. And for little girls, for them to say, hey, that dad is a pretty cool guy. I think it's a message, obviously, that's going to hopefully get into the back of their head that won't come out for a decade or so or more. But you say, a little girl says, I think I'm going to be looking for a guy who's going to be actively involved with his kids, as opposed to a girl who grows up saying, I haven't seen any dads involved in anything. I think I'll do this on my own. I can be a single mother.
One comment I have, Armin, I just kind of need to get it off my chest. So I volunteer quite a bit in my local community. I'm on the board executive of several nonprofits here. And many of these organizations, I would say vast majority women. And because I kind of share seats on the board with them, I find myself kind of being that guy who's like separating the women. It's like they're always arguing with each other. They're always talking badly about each other. And then they call me up because I guess I'm the only man who's just quiet, trying to contribute my fair share. And they call me and they talk for hours and hours and hours. And it's like never ending. This has been going on since back when I was in high school. This is not a recent thing. What's going on?
Explain women.
There's probably money to be made there. But no, I think it's, I don't know. I would. Are you married?
I am married.
Yeah,
I am married.
So you want to be careful with that then. It's an interesting thing. I think that you may be seeing something that some of these women are not able to talk to their husbands about some of these issues, and so they have. As I was talking about earlier on in the interview, about they've discovered that you're somebody that they can talk to about interpersonal problems that they're having with other women, whereas their husband is not the guy they can talk to about those things. And you obviously are presenting some sort of a vibe that says, I'm somebody who can listen and who will help you resolve these things. I guess it's congratulations. It's a great place to be.
So can you explain, when did you realize that this was kind of an area that really needed someone such as yourself to come in to help out with? Kind of what was kind of, I guess, your starting point to say, you know what, and this is an area that has a need, I think I can fill it. What led you to that?
Well, it started when my first one was not quite born yet. I was looking for some sort of guidance and reassurance and resources that were going to help me be the kind of dad that I wanted to be, which was more involved and more hands-on. And I didn't have a role model for that. My dad worked hard, and this is not taking anything away from him, but he was a guy, a father of the 60s, and that's the way things were then. And so I wanted to do things a little bit differently. And there were nothing. There were occasional articles in some of the women's magazines. Those were usually about how to get your husband to do more stuff around the house. So that wasn't terribly helpful. What to Expect When You're Expecting, which was the only real significant book out there at the time, had nothing about fathers in there at all. And I got really annoyed at that. It really irked me that there were no resources. And so I started writing snippy essays right after my daughter was born about the lack of father role models in children's literature, about men not taking paternity leave, and ended up with the first version of the Expectant Father, the first edition, which was really the book that I wish I would have had at the time. And it was a book that really came out of frustration and anger in many ways, more than anything else. And so it was answering the questions that I had. And I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of other guys who were expecting or had recently had kids and added that perspective. And I spent a huge amount of time in the psychology libraries at UC Berkeley and really just gathered together all the information that I thought really would be helpful for guys to understand what they're going through, what the baby's going through, what their partner's going through, and then how to be a super involved dad if that's what you want to be, how to figure out what kind of role you want to have and where to go with it. And it's been the same model for all of the books that I've done, and there are a total of 10 books on fatherhood now. And every one of them is, in some ways, the book I wish I would have had when I needed it. And I didn't have it when I needed it, so I decided to write it.
Yeah, so I know Naresh has a question, but I have a quick comment. I have to say, after my first was born, I actually started a dad blog. It was called Hanging with Dad, and I was trying to show men that they could be, kind of the presence that stay-at-home moms were, but I could not for the life of me get men to read it. It was, my entire audience was stay-at-home moms, and I just never was able to land that male audience.
Yeah, it's hard. There's a whole dad blogging community now, which seems to be pretty tight, and there are a lot of guys who read it, but it's a struggle. It really is.
Can you tell us, Armin, you served in the military, you were a former Marine. Tell us about your career and how did you go from military man to writing about men?
Oh, well, I was in the military. I joined when I was 17, and I was in for 6 years. So I was out long before I had kids, which is probably a very good thing for everybody. I was an interrogator translator. I was in military intelligence, and so it was. It really had nothing to do with fatherhood at all. But it was something I think that stayed in the back of my mind, and where it came back was right after 9/11. I started getting all sorts of emails from 2 different categories of people. It was really interesting. I got these emails from guys who said, I just got deployed. I'm going to be gone for a year. My wife is pregnant. How am I going to come back to and have a relationship with a child who's born when I'm gone? And then I would get a little while later into the process, I'd get an email from a woman who would say, my husband just came back and he has no idea what to do with this baby. Or my husband just came back and he's been gone for a year. Our little baby comes up running and wants to hug Daddy hello, and he turns around and he's about ready to throw this kid out the window. And what do we do? Because he's got PTSD or something, although they weren't talking about PTSD right in the very beginning of the post-9/11 times. And I realized that I had a sense of military life and also had a pretty good sense because the fatherhood books had been out and doing well for a while. And I thought, well, I really am in a way uniquely qualified and uniquely obligated to write a book for military fathers. And so I ended up writing one called The Military Father, a hands-on guide for deployed dads, which was looking at exactly the issues the questions that I was getting, which how do I maintain a relationship with my family before I go on a deployment? How do I keep a relationship solid with the kids, with the partner, with the wife, because they're almost all married in the military, the fathers anyway. How do I keep those things going while I'm deployed? And then when I come back, I'm not going to be the same person as I left, and they're not going to be the same family as when I left. And how do I get plugged in back into a new normal life? We're not going to get the old normal back. We're going to get a different normal. And so that was really, I thought, another book. It was not the case, as I mentioned before, of something I wish I would have had because I didn't have any need for it when I was in, but it was something that I realized that there was definitely a need for the guys who are gone and just really need to figure out how to maintain relationships. And through that experience was able to do some trainings, a whole bunch of classes in Japan, at a military base in Japan for Marines, and I did a lot of work with Navy SEALs, and it was so gratifying to see these guys these are tough guys, especially the Navy SEALs, and they come back or they just want to maintain a relationship with their kid and to see them getting teary-eyed talking about how important that is in their life, it really hit me in a good place. It makes me feel like I'm doing important work.
Now, you mentioned that the women and the men were asking you whenever they get back kind of your advice. Now, you have your syndicated newspaper column and your syndicated radio show. How have the questions been changing as the quarantine and coronavirus has come in? Kind of what have you seen a shift in questions?
Well, there's a lot of questions about what do I do, just as kind of what we started with. Mm-hmm. What do you do with kids? I'm going crazy. How do I maintain a relationship? I actually just did a column about this particular issue: is how do I keep from losing my mind here, or from wanting to throw my kids out a window, or the kinds of frustrations that we all deal with. Those are particularly important. But even without that, there have been a slowly changing variety of questions that have come up, in particular about technology and young kids, and is it okay to? And there, in a way, there are questions that apply to the COVID situation as well. Is it okay to give my 6-month-old my iPad? And if so, how long? And things like that are important issues to deal with.
Yeah, now talking about your books, The Expectant Father and The New Father, just want to touch on those a little bit. One of my kind of through experience, I think a lot of really the mainstream talks about women during pregnancy and women postpartum, and they never talk about men. Like it's outside of your books, it's just not talked about. So can you tell us a little bit about the emotional, financial, and physical changes that fathers experience during the course of his partner's pregnancy and after a child is born?
Well, what's really interesting is, and I wish that more people knew about this, and this is one of my missions, I think, is to educate people about this, is that during pregnancy, women, no question, hands down, have the overwhelming majority of the physical experience of pregnancy. Although there is a thing called Couvade syndrome, which I have. Men get.
I did.
Well, yeah. So somewhere, so this is somewhere between 20 and 80% of men have some sort of physical symptoms, and that could be weight gain or toothaches or nosebleeds or whatever it is, a whole bunch of different things. And there's all sorts of speculation about what that's about, whether it's a psychological, hey, she's not the only one who's expecting, you need to be paying attention to me too. It could be that kind of thing. It could be a way of trying to take away some of her pain that she's going through, as we'll take on some of that load. Whatever it is, it happens, and so there can be a physical thing. But let's put that aside for the moment and say that women have definitely the lion's share of the physical burden of pregnancy. However, from a psychological perspective, the experience of pregnancy is just as profound for men as it is for women. That women are wondering, how are we going to afford this? Am I going to be able to make it through? Is my husband going to love me afterwards? Am I going to be able to have a career? All of those kinds of questions. Am I going to be a good mother? Do I have to do what my mother did? Can I get out of that? And dads are asking themselves the same questions, exactly the same questions at different times, though. And so one of the interesting things about pregnancy, especially, is that if you look at trimesters, men are about a trimester behind where women are. So for the first 3 months or so, women know they're pregnant. They can feel things are going on. Their body is changing. Things are different than they were before. And they're kind of excited about it for the most part. Men often forget about the whole thing. You can go a couple of days without even thinking about the pregnancy. But after that first trimester, women tend to be very introspective, and they start thinking about themselves. As I mentioned, am I going to be a good mother? How are we going to afford this? How am I going to maintain a career? And that's right when the dad starts to get excited, because he's heard the heartbeat now, and he's seen the ultrasound, and there's a connection there. It's really hard to not see or to not feel connected when you actually hear a heartbeat in there. But the dads, again, they're where the moms were 3 months before. In the third trimester, this is where it gets really complicated. The third trimester, the moms tend to look outward. They look at the dad and they say, is he going to love me even though my body is changing? Is he going to be here for me and the baby? Is Is he going to be a good provider, protector? So she's focusing on him, and that's exactly the moment where the dads pick up where the moms were before, and the dads are now saying, oh my goodness, or can we afford this? I may have to get a second job. I want to be just like my dad, or I don't want to be just like my dad, or what kind of dad am I going to be? And so he's putting a lot of pressure on himself to be perfect and be the great dad, and she's putting a lot of pressure on him to be there and to call her 3 times a day and check in on her. And that can lead to a lot of tension in the last couple of months of the pregnancy. So that's what's going on there. And then after the baby shows up, there are a lot of things I think that men somehow quite often get into their heads. You can start having sex right after at 6 months or 6 weeks right after the birth. And that tends to not be the case. Yes, I get it. So those are the knowing chuckles I'm hearing. Okay, yeah, it's because it's
like a calendar request. You get an alert 6 weeks later.
You get a calendar invite. Yes, please, we'll meet in the bedroom at 6 weeks from this date. But it doesn't always happen that way, and particularly if the mom is breastfeeding, and particularly if you've got a baby who's challenging, we'll say, and gets up a lot at night or doesn't sleep through the night. She has no interest in being pawed or groped any more than she already is being by the baby. And there's also the whole thing that starts in the middle of the pregnancy and then gets worse as the pregnancy goes on. The whole thing where you used to have hobbies and interests and friendships outside of the relationship, and then as the pregnancy progresses, you get less and less of that, and you slowly switch to the 24-hour baby channel. And after the baby shows up, it gets even worse. There's nothing to talk about except the baby because people aren't coming over right away, or people are trying to come over, but you don't want too many people in the house, and you're not sleeping, you're not meeting, you're not hanging out with friends, you're not having sex, you're not talking. And again, it puts a lot of strain on the relationship. And so I think those are things that I try to talk about in the books, but are underrated and emphasize the importance of continued short bursts of communication and open conversation. Because if you wait, if you wait too long, these things can explode. You'll end up talking about them, but you can talk about them civilly, or you can talk about them yelling at each other. And I think most people would probably prefer to do the civil option.
Hopefully, at least. Now, my wife and I, when our children were born, we were some of the fortunate ones. I work from home, so that wasn't an issue in terms of staying home with the baby. My wife has a job that's pays enough that she could take off the full couple months that she wanted. Have you seen any shift in the country towards something like paid maternity leave or paid paternal leave, or even just in general? Like a lot of my friends, my male friends, whenever their kid is born, it's like, oh, my work is going to let me take 2 weeks of my vacation, and then I have to go back to work. And I'm just like, man, for me, that wouldn't be enough. And so have you seen any movement towards giving dads more time off whenever the baby is born?
Well, no. There was just something that passed. It didn't get a whole lot of press, and I'm concerned about why that is, that I'm pretty sure that government workers were just given some paid leave, which is going to be really the only significant group of people in the country that have paid leave. We don't generally have that. There are occasional companies that offer it, but it's certainly not something that's widespread, and we are either the only one or one of just a couple industrialized countries that don't have a paid leave program. And we can get into the economics of it, but I think it's not quite as easy as somebody just pushing their legislator to vote for paid leave, because who's going to pay for that? And does everybody want to have their taxes go up significantly so we can have a paid leave program? And employers just can't magically print money so that they can pay all their workers. So I think it's something we should be striving towards. We've got to figure out how to make it happen. But I think that even if it's not, I guess that's the best case scenario, is it's paid. And even if in situations where it is paid, a lot of guys don't take it. And that's the bigger problem, is that still it's really fascinating that if you look at even studies of millennials, who are supposed to be the most progressive folks out there, if they say, the question is, well, what do you think a father's role in a family should be? The majority of them say provider, protector. And that's really, it's good and it's bad. I mean, we still see the dad's role as the provider. And so guys look at themselves and they say, if I take time off of work, I'm not going to make partner, or I'm not going to get a promotion, or I'm not going to have these opportunities that I would have if I didn't take the leave. And so they want to be there all the time. And men tend to suffer more in their careers if they take a lot of time off. So, and in a ways you could say, well, okay, women have been suffering for a long time for taking time off, and that's absolutely true. But if you look at a head-to-head comparison, men who take time off, an equivalent amount of time off as women do, they do worse. They end up penalized financially more. But it's something that I think is a major deficit in our society. We really need to be able to do more, and in particular to do outreach and encourage men to do this. That it's something that you guys could be really spreading the word about, and people who are listening who aren't necessarily working at home but who are working in offices, for young guys who are having kids now, to take time off and encourage the people who are working for them to take time off and set an example and show that when you do have an opportunity to take leave, you become more committed to your employer and you become a better employee. There's surveys about this or studies about this to show that companies that have progressive leave policies, that particularly the dads, they're more loyal, they're less likely to suffer from absenteeism or presenteeism, either one of those, less likely to indiscriminately to take sick days when they're not really sick, better customer service, the companies do better in share price and in profits. It's a significant thing. It really makes a big difference when you feel your employer is committed to you, you're going to commit to them.
Yeah, it's incredible to me, especially when my wife was going towards delivery and talking about getting time off, how much the older employees just had this mindset that was, well, whenever I was your age and I had kids, I didn't get time off, so you shouldn't either, or I don't care if you get time off because of that. It just blew my mind, the mindset that there was in the country towards, well, I didn't get it, so why should you?
I got to say, I think that is absolutely stupid. I just hate to generally characterize other people's views as stupid, but you hear about this in the medical profession as well, and with doctors, interns, or kids who are in internship right after medical school, and they're working 48 hours on and 48 hours off or something like that.
Yeah, they had to limit them to 100 hours a week not that many years ago. They had to limit it to 100 hours a week.
Yeah, and I mean, but the big reason why they do that is because the people who are supervising them did that.
Yeah. And
you say to them, but you realize that if somebody is working 48 hours at a stretch, how high do you think that the likelihood is of them, or the risk of committing some sort of terrible medical error where they amputate the wrong limb or they do something because they're exhausted out of their minds? How about if you work regular 8-hour shifts like everybody else, we'll have a better healthcare system?
Third leading cause of death in the United States is medical error.
Medical errors, yeah, and that is partly I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but I'm sure that some of it has to do with exhaustion.
Yeah. Well, talking a little bit about, you made the comment on kind of the stereotypical roles, how men view masculinity, how they view themselves. And I want to share an opinion and see what you have to say about it. But I'm of the opinion, look, there's a big difference between being a provider financially and being a leader. And just my opinion again is I feel like every family needs to have a leader, whether it's the mother or the father or both. But there needs to be a leader. And I think it's just human nature that it just kind of, it seems like more men tend to be the leaders of the family than the women, but that does, than the wives or the mother. But that doesn't necessarily mean the man makes more money or has a better job. Leadership is so many different other factors that I think has nothing to do with education or job or money or the number in a bank account.
I think you're right in theory. I think it's harder in practice is the problem. And it gets back to the definition of provider-protector and how deep seated that is in all of us is that men and women still tend to look at the man's role as making money. And that's why one of my books was years ago was looking at the obstacles that keep men from being involved in their kids' lives. And the original title of it was The Other Glass Ceiling. It was referencing a famous book at the time by Susan Faludi called The Glass Ceiling, which talked about the obstacles that keep women from advancing. And so it's called this The Other Glass Ceiling. And the reality of it is, I think some of the glass ceiling that keeps women, the more traditional glass ceiling, keeps women from advancing in the workplace is men's belief that they need to be the guys in charge. They need to be the boss. They need to be making more money. And so there can be some subtle obstacles that are placed in the way of women advancing in the workplace. You can argue about how extensive that is, but I think that some of whatever the issue is, some of that is the result of men's belief that they need to be the provider, the primary force in the workplace. And the other glass ceiling that I was talking about comes from women believing that they need to be the primary parent in the home, and that they need to be the ones who are making the decisions or telling the dad how to do things their way, the right way. And they want to be the one that the kid runs to with a skinned knee, and they want to be the savior, and that kind of thing. And so they can put obstacles in the way of dads taking on a more equal role in the home. And so it's really hard to shake those things. And I think both men and women, a lot of us are doing better with egalitarian role sharing. But even in couples where they really try to be egalitarian, they often do tend to shake out into more traditional ways of dads doing dad's things and moms doing mom things. Moms are doing more cooking, dads are doing more playing and more cleaning up the garage and mowing the lawn. And it's hard. It really is hard. And it's great for kids when they see moms and dads sharing these kinds of things, because it gives them the idea that they don't have to break down according to traditional gender roles. But I'm not sure about whether you actually have to have a leader, somebody who's in charge, somebody who you say, well, that's going to be the decision maker. I think it's better for kids to say, well, I think my mom does this better. I'll talk to her about those things. My dad does that better. I'll talk to him about those things. And then I know that mom and dad together are going to have to get together and make big decisions about homework or after-school activities or whatever. But it's and kids are really good about figuring those things out. Who does different things and who doesn't do different things, and they'll figure out obviously ways to play us against each other.
Who says yes?
So it's I think the leadership thing again. I'm not completely sure that I agree that there should be somebody who has 51% of the votes, if that's what you mean.
I couldn't agree with you more in regards to the gender roles. I found an article that was referring to a study whenever my first kid was born that said that dads kind of had a harder time staying at home because they still believed that they needed to make money, and so that more dads kind of worked from home when they were stay-at-home parents than stay-at-home moms did, because the stay-at-home moms were able to switch into the gender role of, oh, I'm the caregiver, whereas the men who were staying home were like, yes, I'm the caregiver, but I also have to provide financially. So I couldn't agree with you more there. Armin, can you tell people where they can find out more about you and how they can get a hold of you if they need?
Sure. I think the best place to go would be mrdad.com, mrdad.com, and you can get information about the books, and there's hundreds, probably thousands of different articles on there that are all free, and there's lots of podcasts available. And again, columns that you mentioned. I also do a column on men's health that's you can get through that site as well. So that's the place, and you can drop me an email. I try to respond to everything as soon as I can.
Awesome. That's mrdad.com. And Armin Brott, you're the New York Times bestselling author of The Expectant Father and The New Father, #1 New York Times bestselling author. Check them out on Amazon or the website that he just shared. Armin, any final thoughts on work from home or advice that you have to all our fathers and mothers listening out there?
Well, I think for dads, my advice is wherever you are in your fatherhood journey, just close your eyes, jump in there, and start making mistakes. I think that that's the only way that you are going to become a better, a more competent and confident dad, is by making a bunch of mistakes. And for moms, I would say take a deep breath and take a step the other way and let the father do what he needs to do. Dads and moms do things differently. They're equally important, but they're different. And if he does everything the way that you tell him to do it, he's going to become mommy's little helper instead of daddy, who's got a strong relationship with his kids based on himself. And so you never would have gotten involved with him if you would have thought he was a danger to children. So let him alone.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Armin Brott, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners out there, check us out, www.workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. If you have any questions for us about this episode, if you want to ask Mr. Brott a question, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. We'll make sure he gets your question and also answers it. So hello@workfromhomeshow.com if you want to reach out to us. Once again, Armin Brott, thanks so much for your time and all the best to you. Thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. It was great to talk to you guys.
And until next time, keep on working from home.